We are live tonight. It's Standing for Truth coming to you with Team Young Earth Creation. Today is going to be the first episode of our series, The Creation Hour. We've finished our series on phylogeny challenge and phylogenetic systematics debunked. Make sure you check that out. It's a three-part series, as well as we've finished, at least for now, our series on debunking some of the arguments from Nestlig and Rationale Mind. So certainly check that out as well. We'll be doing these episodes probably once, maybe twice a week, talking about what's relevant in the world of creation, evolution. So today we've got Landon, we've got Ra, Matt, and we've got Jeremy here. So we're going to have some fun, guys. We're going to start it off with something that Landon noticed, as well as myself. Actually, he's in the chat right now, Athena, so that's good. It was a discussion that he was having with Raging Atheist, and it looked like they got into a brief discussion on evolution and how, you know, we can see it all around us. We can see it in bacteria. We can see it in viruses. But at the end of the day, it's important to define terms, because if you're just going to throw out the word evolution, we all know that the word evolution can mean different things. And if we look at you know, what the word biological evolution means, which is just a change in allele frequency and populations or in species or gene pool over time or over generations, that type of microevolutionary variation where you would get this, say, change in the frequency of the expression of different traits, that's not really disputed, because anybody, whether creationist or evolutionist, are going to agree that, you know, that type of evolution, if that's what we're talking about, that's going to explain the survival of the fittest, but not the arrival of the fittest. You know, just simply invoking the word evolution in regards to change is not going to prove that, you know, whales and banana plants are related through common ancestry. So sure, that type of evolution is going to explain the small scale variation, but we want to see, you know, the major innovations, the major origin events of major new forms of life. So that's where the difference lies. And in regards to bacteria, I mean, how many thousands of generations have we seen Lenski and his bacterial experiment, and the changes that we've seen have largely been due to reductive evolution. So if you're going to look at that type of large-scale evolutionary change, we're not seeing it. Landon, did you have some thoughts on that there, brother?
Yeah, I was going to say, it kind of relates to that article I was reading last video about how, I mean, that's really not a problem for creationists. I mean, we observe these variations in populations constantly. I mean, we even, like, by definition, we would accept macroevolution even if it did lead to another species, because a kind constitutes more than just a species in most cases. And, like, even if there is variation in bacteria, virus populations, it's not really and it's not adding new information. It's more like the reshuffling of existing information. So you could use, like, all kinds of examples, even like the classical example of the peppered moth. Like, that's not really adding anything. I mean, the information is already there. It's just variation within the population. I mean, when we're asking for, like, proof of, you know, evolution, or if they're wanting to prove evolution, they need to go beyond that, because, you know, we don't have a problem with variations within populations. It's much, I mean, it fits in all of our models. I mean, you know, we're asking for much more than that. You know, that's like, what do you guys think about that? Do you have anything to add?
No, you're absolutely right. And even if, because obviously it's going to come down to whether or not, you know, mutations or construction, but given the empirical data, you know, we know they're destruction. So, you know, the mechanisms of evolution, natural selection acting upon random mutations, random variation, you know, it's not going to lead to that type of large scale evolution that the evolutionists would want you to believe. And even if you look at, I put on the the screen share here just for the audience. If you look at some of the major claims or for beneficial mutations that actually add the novel information to the genome, whether it's nylon digestion by bacteria, aerobic citrate digestion by bacteria, we're looking at loss of information, loss of genes, loss of specificity, loss of net information at the end of the day. Even sickle cell anemia is due to a broken protein, a broken gene. So sure, you're going to get some type of advantage, but at the end of the day, it's deleterious. And even if they resort to gene duplications, we know those are universally deleterious as well. So I think it always comes down to net loss versus net gain. And whether it's a gene duplication, point mutation, whatever it is, a few rare, say, beneficial mutations, quote unquote, that is not going to be able to offset the many accumulating deleterious mutations or duplications. So at the end of the day, when it comes down to net loss versus net gain, I think the evolutionist fails at all levels.
Yeah,
I agree.
Especially with bacterial resistance to drugs. Think of it like they use this one as proof of evolution, right? Like, well, how can the bacteria be adapting? But this occurs from a loss of information, not a gain in any way, shape, or form. So the basic statement that they're saying is just a misunderstanding. For mutations that actually cause anaerobic resistance, they still involve complete information loss when you really look into it. For example, take the bacteria antibiotic streptomycin. It attaches to the part of the bacterial cell called the ribosomes. These mutations cause a structural deformity in the ribosomes. So the antibiotic itself actually cannot mess or connect with the misshapen ribosome. So the bacteria becomes resistant. So as you can see, that's not an example of adding new information. It's a mutation that's actually causing a benefit. But it's just by luck that it happens. That's why they constantly have to get antibiotics all the time, right? Even though it's for the same sickness, because they have to cause that mutation so that that sickness can't attach to itself.
I wanted to add real quick, since the topic of bacteria and viruses came up, I wrote an article, or it's a real short article a few years ago, or about a year and a half ago, called Bacteria and the Origin of Life. And I go over how they display just very intricate, they have very intricate features. They're very intelligent. And I included some really interesting links. I'm going to post the link to the article in the chat in case anyone wants to read it. I just wanted to mention that real quick because it's got some pretty compelling evidence in there about, I mean, even if you go by like an older time scale, you would have to conclude maybe that, I mean, bacteria, they arose pretty, hold on just a second.
I know what you mean. These bacteria have been in people for a really long time, and they're naturally resistant. So it's not that they've evolved because of a new antibiotic that's formed. Matter of fact, in 1988, researchers did autopsies on people, I think on the Northwest Passage of explorers, and they found that when they died, they tested their colon for cultures. And what happened was they actually found already resistant bacteria from antibiotics, from modern day ones. So how could that happen, since they died way before antibiotics were even invented?
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm about to post the link right now in the chat. But yeah, I just thought I'd bring that up because, I mean, I think that bacteria and viruses are some of the best evidence for creation you can have. Just thinking about this, I mean, they're so much more intricate than people used to think they were. I mean, it's just, it continues to amaze me. I mean, so yeah, I've just posted it.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, if you're going to look to, bacteria, for example, as say evidence for large scale evolution, I mean, at the end of the day, what we see in bacteria is more consistent with biblical creation. And one of the largest running or longest running experiments on large scale evolution with Lenski's experiment, he's obviously not demonstrating any type of large scale evolution. And sure that they've seen some adaptation in these bacterial E. coli populations, but a lot of it is due to reductive evolution, and it's not even uncontested. I mean, you can Google reductive evolution in bacteria, and it's seen in all types of bacteria, not just the E. coli. So bacteria producing more bacteria, at the end of the day, that's not going to prove that bacteria and whales are related through common ancestry. So I think that's a pretty silly assertion to make.
I just think that they probably need to stop using that as an example, like if they're trying to disprove our claims, because it's not a problem for us. I mean, there's just really they don't really have an argument, I think, if they're using that example. I mean, variation really, I mean, it's just not a problem for us. So they need to try to find other examples if they're trying to disprove what we're saying.
All right, because no one's disagreeing with
Yeah,
microevolutionary or micro variations, within, say, populations of bacteria. And the thing is, it's kind of like you were talking about when you were reading your article last week, which was a great article, by the way. A lot of these evolutionists don't take the time to, understand our model. And obviously, you can explain, even the created heterozygosity or created genetic diversity hypotheses to them. And the fact that, Adam and Eve weren't created as clones, but they were created with pre-existing functional DNA differences. So, of course, we're not objecting to change. But the thing is, do those changes have limits? Is there a barrier? And at the end of the day, if we see, a loss of information, if we see that our genome is degrading, for example, no amount of any beneficial mutation that they can provide is going to balance out the thousands of deleterious mutations. Like Matt and I were talking, I think it was a couple weeks ago, and we could, name off thousands of deleterious mutations that lead to disease, significant disease. And yet these evolutionists struggle to provide one or two, truly beneficial mutations in man. And yet the ones that they point to a lot of the times, would be related to, say, an epigenetic change. Wouldn't that be right, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what's been the most devastating thing for them recently, is that unfortunately there are few mutations that they actually had they thought were beneficial mutations ended up not being mutations at all. So now they're stuck with 0. So it's even worse for them than before. And especially now that we have the fast mitochondrial clock and now no beneficial mutations, everything's just kind of crumbling between their fingers.
Yeah. Did you have some examples, Matt, of, well, for one, some of these examples that they'll throw at you, right? Like I think there's a certain example, with a larger bone, or, anti-freeze proteins in fish. Some of these examples that are really not even any help to the evolutionary theory, because they are now shown to be, that of an epigenetic change.
Yeah, it's kind of a problem for them, because they first thought like, okay, great, well, our first one we've ever found, we've got lactose mutations. And they claim like, oh, this is just a single point mutation, a single nucleotide pleomorphism, is what they called it. Basically, it's a point mutation that resulted in lactose persistence, and they still promote it even to this day. Unfortunately, they haven't kept up on epigenetics because it's kind of a newer science for them, but they've actually shown that that's actually a pseudoscientific claim, that lactose mutation is that SNP. What they've actually found is this totally methylation regulated by what's called MCM6 and LCT genes, and they're epigenetically regulated by switches. So that's a really good one. And then their increase in bone density is not beneficial mutations at all. It's completely epigenetic regulated. They can read the news article called "Epigenetics Proves That You're Not Stuck with the Bones You Have." And then they have their Milano, which is, again, another one that they messed up on. They thought for sure it's beneficial mutation. What they find? It's another epigenetic controlled regulation. So as you can see, every time they thought they had one, it's crumbled. So pretty good.
And it's funny because we've even said, have one or two, have 10, but in order to address the key issue of net gain versus net loss, you're going to have to present us with thousands of examples of, mutations that are actually adding new, novel, and meaningful information to the genome, because a couple rare beneficial mutations are not going to counterbalance the information loss, and it's not going to be able to compensate for the information loss. You're throwing out all this information and you're getting a random, say, beneficial mutation if it exists. It's not going to work. It's not going to take your fish to fisherman. There's really no hope at the end of the day. And if you don't mind, Matt, can you give a brief rundown on epigenetics for, say, anybody in the audience or anybody that's a little bit confused about epigenetics? Like, isn't epigenetics like outside the genome would be a good way to put it?
Outside and at the beginning. Think of it like at the very start of genetics, because it's the trigger for your genes going on and off. You can inherit these things, or you cannot inherit them. They can also be turned off. So essentially, if you've inherited something that you thought was harmful by your parent, if you do the right things, like let's say for example, you inherit the BRCA gene, which is a breast cancer hormone gene, right? So you've inherited this harmful deleterious mutation gene. So now the odds of you obtaining cancer is pretty high. It's about 50%. So now, am I doomed to die because I have this gene? Not necessarily, because of epigenetics. It's like a switch. So if I don't do the things that constantly make my body build cancer inside of itself, like consume carcinogens, for example, eat lots of French fries, for example, those would be a problem, right?
Well, exactly. And isn't that like we kind of touched on the Milano mutation or the Milano protein example? Right. Isn't that obviously it has to do with HDLs, but how does that relate to kind of what you were saying there with cholesterol and?
Sure. Well, the Milano is the removal of cholesterol from the arterial walls, but the variation of the gene is actually based on alternative splicing. So basically what that means is the gene itself doesn't change, but the transcript itself is altered due to the nutrient adaptive reasons that are clear by the RNA-mediated mechanism. So basically what I'm saying is, like, if I'm going, okay, I'm not going to eat anything that induces cholesterol, so no animal products, no dairy, those epigenetic switches that activate this Milano protein to turn a gene mutation to activate, which is harmful, you don't want that to be on, because that's a horrible thing to actually have to switch on, because that's escape from adaptive conflict by the gene. So now it's, instead of it doing these 4 or 5 different functions, it only does one, and that's to clear out this harmful cholesterol. So it's a regulation by this epigenetic switch that gets turned on out of desperation because of what's going on. So
it's funny. So this is such an obvious loss of specificity, and not even just a loss of specificity, but a loss of net specificity. So once again, they fail to address the key issue of net gain versus net loss. And another thing with that antioxidant activity for the lipids, that specificity doesn't even lie with the mutation itself, but with the actual protein structure, which already existed in which this mutation occurred. So at the end of the day, the fact that these are the best examples that they can give, should make any creationist, feel more than confident with, the biblical creation model, because it's pretty telling when, 99% of examples that they give are some type of decay of prior information, or something that's, just an epigenetic change, non-random, mutational change, or just change in general. So it's pretty weak on the part of the evolutionist.
Yeah, it is, especially when they get so excited that they finally find a new one, like that high altitude of the Sherpa, for example, right? They go, oh my gosh, we finally found people that evolved to living in these high altitude situations. Unfortunately, what they did is, when these people actually came for testing and they came down, after a few months, of course, they wanted to go back home. So they were finishing up their experiments, and what they've actually found out is that epigenetic regulation switch for their high altitude adaptation switched off, so that that single 1-point mutation that led to better adaptation to these high altitudes was epigenetic regulated all to begin with. So it actually was, they thought it was a mutation that was permanent, right? It wasn't. It turned back off.
Well, even with like the nodothenoid, with the glycoprotein gene that gets turned on epigenetically, when they enter cold water, it's like all of this, which they say are the best examples for large scale evolution, are more consistent with a biblical based model, because obviously these types of changes, if they're based on, built-in adaptation, via certain environmental conditions, selective pressures, that's more consistent with a model of design. So even those examples of the anti-freeze protein fish, still not going to help fish to fisherman, right? Are those kind of the same thing that we're talking about here, epigenetic regulation?
Exactly. And what makes it even worse is these modifications that epigenetics actually do inside of people themselves, they actually even result in subtle DNA error as well. So not only can they do something beneficial, but sometimes they actually cause errors in the DNA. So not only are they sometimes beneficial for turning something off, you're good. The risks are actually outweigh the reward as well. So that's even
Okay. So still at the end of the day, it can lead to more harm than good, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. It leads to gradual and inevitable DNA degradation over time. So basically, epigenetic adaptation will never result in any kind of evolution because epigenetic mechanisms only regulate pre-existing biological information.
Wow. So if you look at really just beneficial mutations in general, for one, they're rare. Even the evolutionist admits that, which means there's going to be extreme and obvious limits to what these advantageous mutations can do. And they obviously can't make the type of compensation that would be needed to stop, say, the net loss of information. And even natural selection is going to be, severely constrained in the case of, say, selecting for any type of beneficial mutation, because so let's say, natural selection is looking to select for one trait. That's going to interfere with selecting for another trait. And when you have billions of traits, segregating in the population, then the selection process, it actually starts to work against itself. Which ultimately means that you end up with being able to, only select the best and then the worst mutations. But it's the low impact mutations, the near neutral mutations, they accumulate in the genome and, slowly lead to genomic degradation. So obviously we're going, down, not up. Certainly no help to the evolutionist.
Or ourselves, because look at our audience. They just go away now.
Well, exactly, right? Like, how much response have we received, especially from the last couple, phylogeny challenge, phylogenetic systematics debunked videos? I mean, they have no answers. Their theory has been falsified, and it just comes down to the fact that they're just denying science. Dr. John Sanford speaks at NIH, but yet, someone like Paula Dia thinks he's a lot smarter than Dr. John Sanford. Like, what a joke some of these YouTube atheists are becoming.
Yeah, they don't know the material, unfortunately. So it's kind of hard for them to really debate against it. That's why they just spend their time with their audience. That's why they don't debate. If they wanted to, they would be here right now. Where are they? They're nowhere. They're at the buffet.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And then Landon, you were saying in the chat, brother, that you had something that you wanted to read off in regards to viruses.
Oh yeah, I just thought it'd be a good point to make. I was going to say that viruses. A lot of biologists don't even consider them living. If you did consider them living, they'd probably be considered the simplest organisms around. But they're just so intelligent. And I was going to read a piece of my article. It starts with I said even viruses display intelligence, and they aren't even considered living organisms by many scientists. Though some do consider them to be alive. One article states that viruses are very intelligent. They can think. They can do things that we do not expect. They adapt to the environment. They change themselves in order to survive. And then another quote says, part of this comes from the ability of viruses to shuffle genes with as much deft as some genetic engineers. Viruses can pick up pieces of cellular genes, and incorporate their genes into the cell's genome. That makes viruses. It's a very dynamic process. That's why I always feel that the viruses are alive. And then I got another source. It says another study on viruses determined that what has confounded the virology community for quite some time is the observation that cell fate of a bacteria infected by a single virus can be dramatically different than that infected by two viruses. Our study suggests that viruses can collectively decide whether or not to kill a host, that individual viruses taught each other as a result of interactions between viral genomes and viral proteins they direct the infected host to produce. And I think that was it, but that was relating to kind of like what Raw Matt was saying. Like, evolution, if you define it, is change over time, but the organism is controlling its evolution. So it's not Darwinism; it's intelligent evolution that is
Right. That's a good point.
Yeah, it's like it's pre-designed evolution, or so. That's just what I wanted to include that real quick. I thought that would be a good point to bring up.
It's exactly what we would expect if biblical creation were true. You know what I mean?
It is.
It's pre-designed, like you said. That's not going to help the evolutionist. So for, say, somebody to just throw out, hey, we see evolution all the time. Hey, we see it in bacteria and in viruses. I mean, for one, they're fighting a straw man if they're trying to debunk biblical creation. And secondly, if they think that that's proof for universal common ancestry at the end of the day, obviously they're only fooling themselves.
Yeah, this just think about how bacteria and by extension viruses, if we were going by old Earth evolutionary timeline, this intelligence, since a lot of bacteria are the same as they were hundreds of or perhaps billions of years ago, this intelligence would have had to evolve by Darwinian means through a very short period of time. I mean, that just makes it all the more unlikely for a naturalistic explanation to be plausible. I mean, it's just ridiculous to think that this could evolve, especially, I mean, just on its own through natural selection. I mean, it's just, I don't see it. I mean, it doesn't seem very plausible.
Well, you're exactly right. And even in regards to some of these changes we see, for example, I think it's some changes, some adaptation that we're seeing in some lizards on an island. And some of these changes, can't even be explained because they happen so fast, the adaptation that occurred. It's hard pressed to say that these happen, via mutation or natural selection acting upon random mutations. But as Matt was talking about earlier, these non-random, these epigenetic changes, that better explains some of these, say, adaptations, for example, in these lizard populations versus evolutionary change.
That's why I'm just so shocked that so many are they want to cling to modern evolutionary synthesis, neo-Darwinism, even though there's so much evidence that has been discovered that contradicts all of that. And they still, I think the reason is it's the most naturalistic theory of evolution that they have. So they have got, I mean, even if epigenetics, all the intelligence organisms, they still kind of disregard that because they have to stick with something that is as naturalistic as possible. And if they rely on alternative theories, it runs the risk of pointing towards a designer. And I don't think that's something that I think that they're trying to avoid.
Well, I think you landed it there perfectly, right? It's the only thing. It's the only game in town for the evolutionists. Natural selection, acting upon random variation, random mutations, going to take their fish to fishermen. And at the end of the day, all empirical evidence suggests otherwise, but they don't have anything else, or else they pretty much have to admit that if evolution didn't do it, well, what did it? And that just brings them one step closer to the obvious conclusion of a designer. And that's exactly what, they don't want to have to admit. And even just to, debunk the long time scale of an old Earth, just in regards to everything we're saying with genome degradation, deleterious mutation accumulation, even if you look at, say, something like a horseshoe crab, we see these horseshoe crabs deep in the geological record. And what do we see? We see stasis. We see that they're unchanged. And the fact that we know DNA is degrading, this proves that these genomes, our genomes, have a limited shelf life. So how can these horseshoe crabs that apparently these deep time lineages, how can they be going unchanged when we know that our genomes are degrading? So these deep time lineages are impossible.
I'm trying to remember this quote that I saw. It was from some article. They were talking about organisms in Cambrian layer rock, and they were saying that they didn't. I'm trying to remember what they said. That there was no evolution. They just started off diverse and then they just gradually died out. There was no evolution. It was either stasis or them just gradually dying out. I'm not sure exactly what they were talking about, but I remember I saw it was a secular article. I had to try to look for it.
Oh yeah, it's called the Cambrian explosion. You can find that all over. Life just seemingly came out of nowhere all at once, and
Yeah.
unevolved. You know, like all 32 mammal species, all just everywhere at once. The same ones that we have now. You know, yeah, they have a lot of problems. You know, dinosaurs from birds. Yet science shows that birds were before dinosaurs, so they had to excuse that one. They tell us that somehow the amazing strong dinosaur all died out from a meteor, but the weak birds survived. And then they changed that and said, well, that can't be true. So I guess only a few dinosaurs survived. They evolved, you know. And then even though their own scientists point to when they inspected the Cretaceous layers of rock, they found flamingos and loons and sandpipers and parrots and penguins and albatross and ducks and common era birds. They don't mention that, do they? I have all the links.
Yeah, they exclude that. Anything that contradicts their narrative, they'll exclude, or they just won't mention it at all.
Exactly.
It's funny because it's like these secular papers, these evolutionary scientists, they're just debunking their own theory, their own science fiction religion for us. You just see all this contradictory information like you guys are talking about, or suppressed information. We're just sitting back thinking, wow, you know, you're debunking it for us.
Yeah, think about what they did with the mitochondrial clock. They they predicted that Eve and mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Adam were about 135,000 years ago. That's the average date for them, right? They said that's proof that out that. Well, guess what the problem with that is? They said that occurred from a bottleneck, right? Well, guess what? There's no bottleneck in their fossil record at that time. What is that?
I hear it. I can't hear him. Is his mic off?
Jeremy, are you? If you want to say something, brother, I was hearing a bit of an echo coming from his end. I'm not sure if it's been resolved or not. Did you want to say something, Jeremy? We'll see if it's been resolved.
There's a problem with my audio.
Well, I heard some kind of echo, or Raw Matt was cutting out. I don't know if that was. I guess that he didn't mean to do that. It seemed like he cut off.
Because of me, he cut off?
No, I'm not saying it's because of you. I'm just saying that that's what happened. I don't know if that was what happened.
So my echo is interfering with raw mat?
No, I think it's fine now.
It sounds like your echo is good now. I think when you first unmute yourself, or the background noise really comes in heavy, but
yeah,
it sounds good.
My mother is also using the internet, and we're cooking there. So I don't know, maybe those are factors.
It's possible.
They could be factors, but going back to what Matt was saying in regards to, you know, the mitochondrial Eve, Y chromosome Adam, you know, as we've said many times, it's too close for comfort for the evolutionists, and they have to resort to, you know, bottlenecks to explain, for example, the low genetic diversity that we see. But at the end of the day, all the genetic data points directly to you know, a literal interpretation of Genesis, right? Whether it's low genetic diversity, one Y, you know, chromosome indicating one Y male ancestor, one mitochondrial DNA female ancestor, and most genes come in two versions. And that's not all that's consistent, but that's just a few things that, in a way, the evolutionists have helped us demonstrate.
Totally.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, they do a lot of the hard work for us because they require a lot of things to happen, and their requirements are so high that they've actually lowered it. That's why the word evolution now only means one thing: change of allele frequencies. So it's very simplistic. So when you go, well, evolution's not true, well, that's not true because it only means one thing now. But we all know that it means far more than one thing.
Well, I think it was like David Berlinski that was talking about how, like, the definition of evolution, they kind of changed it to where it's very broad, to the point where I think he said something like change over time by itself isn't a theory. When he was debating evolutionists, it was some debate from the 90s I was watching. I think that is kind of part of the problem. It's anything goes, really. I mean, there's nothing that can really falsify it, because they'll just say, well, that just proves it no matter what.
Well, they moved it to a soft science, so it's improvable and it's also unfalsifiable. So it's really not very scientific anymore because everything should be falsifiable. So if you actually have a theory that predicts everything, then it's not really a theory at all. So that's the biggest problem that they have.
That's a good point. They predict everything. Maybe one or two things come true. Meanwhile, how many things are, being proven false? But yet, it's almost like they're making it an unfalsified theory. And even if you look at something like, the claimed chimp human DNA being similar, it's all based on, preferential and selective treatment of the data, because they're using the sequences that they would actually expect to be similar. And what they're not including, and what they don't tell you, is that they're not including, non-aligned DNA gaps, copy number variations, size differences. So the actual amount of differences between a human and an ape are a lot larger than they'd have you believe. So even that is crashing down on them.
I was going to bring up real quick. We're talking about how evolution or it's unfalsifiable. Wikipedia's pseudoscience page lists several of the traits of pseudoscience, and they match. Evolution matches several of them. Like one of them is use of vague, exaggerated, or untestable claims. Another one is over-reliance on confirmation rather than refutation. Lack of openness to testing by other experts, absence of progress, personalization of issues, that's a big one, and use of misleading language.
Yep.
And
all of those.
Yeah. I mean, there's also some smaller examples like assertions of scientific claims that are vague rather than precise, that lack specific measurements, assertions of a claim that with little or no explanatory power. I mean, that's another big one, that just so story after just so story.
Well, that's what it is. Like, for example, I was watching some of Aron Ra. I was studying the enemy, right? I was watching. I must have got through about 6 or 7 episodes of Aron Ra's classification of life series, and the amount of just so stories that I seen were laughable. And he even got to I think it was the origin of mammals. So one of the first. No, I think it was primates. But regardless, he was talking about, one of the first primates millions of years ago, and he literally went on a just so story, and after the fact, he said, "Oh, and by the way, this is based on I think it was one tooth."
Yeah, they do that pretty often.
You know what I mean? Like, your entire just so story is based on a tooth or a single bone, or I mean, how much inference is being put into that? So it was.
And when it's wrong later, they go, "Oh, it's okay. We have more information now." Even though they built an entire story and history and presented it as factual, they go back on all the time.
Oh, exactly. I mean, just like, for example, the overturning of junk DNA. I mean, how many evolutionists have we seen now that are just fighting that tooth and nail? And what's funny is I found a paper, another rock solid paper, because we know that functional DNA just makes the, degradation problem even worse. And if it's even shown in this paper, it demonstrated, that if it's even shown that, say, a substantial fraction of the human genome is functional, not junk DNA, then the evolution of man would literally be impossible, right? Based on genetic degeneration. Because if we're accumulating these, near neutral deleterious mutations, but yet the majority of our genome is functional, well, that's just going to speed up the degradation problem. But this paper is so rock solid and interesting because in the paper, it states that human evolution would still be very problematic, if not impossible, even if the genome was only 10% functional. And if it's 25% functional, it's still completely impossible. So even if you just didn't want to, sit there and argue all day with the evolutionists about, say, ENCODE, because we know that ENCODE has revealed that, at least 80% of the genome is actively transcribed. But even if you just didn't feel like sitting there and arguing, about the data with them, the fact is, even if at least 10% of it is functional, which even the evolutionists will say, yeah, probably about 20% is functional, that still demonstrates that evolution is impossible. So they're literally stuck between a rock and a hard place at this point.
Totally. Hey guys, sorry, I got to cut out. I got an interview over at the Eternal Life fan club right now.
No problem, brother.
All
Thanks
right.
for coming on. We'll talk to you soon. Have fun with Rowan. Thanks, Matt.
He's in the chat room, by the way. I saw him say, "Oh, yay, no more SpongeBob."
Yeah, you know what? It looks like a lot of people are digging the new logo, so that's what I like to hear.
Awesome.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, have fun, guys.
Okay, man.
right,
Take
bye.
it easy. Jeremy,
Yeah.
did you another thing, because we we're trying to keep it relevant topics, but Aron Ra was talking about, did you want to briefly go into CPT for anyone who doesn't understand what that stands for? It stands for catastrophic plate tectonics, and it's a very strong model, a flood geology model, and it seems like in Aron Ra's a couple of his latest rebuttals to flood geology, a lot of what he's saying, a lot of the objections he has can be readily explained based on the CPT model. Did you have anything to add there, Jeremy?
Actually, the way I see it, the things that that fat pig Aron Ra was trying to refute are mostly hydroplate theory, not the CPT.
Right. Good point. Good point. So do you suspect he's not quite aware of CPT?
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm sure he did not comprehensively studied it. So we're going to CPT now.
Yeah, you know what? I think it'd be a good idea. Just for the audience, we're going to be making a few videos in the future. I'm not sure what episode, but we will be going, heavily more and more into CPT. We may just go into more of the basics, or even maybe a little bit more than a basic level understanding of it here. But yeah, I think it's a good idea to go into CPT, if you don't mind, Jeremy.
Okay. Catastrophic plate tectonics, or CPT, is actually just like the standard evolutionary plate tectonics, but it's a much faster and stronger version of it. Okay. Let's say plate tectonics, standard evolutionary plate tectonics, its movements are inches per year of the continents, for example. But in CPT, it's meters per second movement. Meters per second during the flood. So I'm just trying to illustrate how huge the differences are. And it's also one reason why it's almost irrefutable, because it assumes so much of the standard evolutionary plate tectonics. So in a way, we are using evolutionary plate tectonics, their standard geologic model, against them. That's why this is so strong. It is the leading flood model of a young Earth creationist, and this idea came straight from reading the Bible. When in Genesis 7:11, chapter 7:11, God said that He let the fountains of the great deep burst out, and it's the start of the flood. So as you can see, the flood started in the oceans, because the great deep is the ocean, correct? So okay. So materials like magma and water from inside the earth came out of that crack. And by the way, God also said in Genesis that He created water inside the earth. Okay, so materials like magma and water from inside the earth came out of that crack from the great deep, on the great deep. And we even discovered this huge water source inside the earth called the Beijing anomaly. Okay, so steam jets, okay, were bursting out of the underwater crack. Okay, the underwater crack, like I said, is the actually, by the way, the CPT model only assumes one miracle, just one miracle, and then everything happens catastrophically and naturally. The one miracle is God cracking the the ocean crust, okay, in order for the waters to burst out. So that's the only miracle in this model. So it's that's the only assumption, by the way. So this is very good because that's the only assumption. Evolutionary plate tectonics has tons of assumptions, but CPT only has one major assumption. Okay. Now, so when God cracked the ocean floor, steam jets, including magma and water, like I said, were bursting out of the underwater crack that God cracked. Those steam jets actually went all the way to the atmosphere, causing intense global rain. So as you can see, the primary source of the rain was not a supernatural global clouds that God created. So God did not create global clouds, rain clouds, nimbus clouds, or whatever, to create the intense global rain. Okay, it is the steam jets that went all the way to the atmosphere. Okay, these steam jets are happening worldwide. There are cracks all over the earth. That's the only miracle that God did, opening up those cracks. Those steam jets went all the way to the atmosphere. Okay, and when those steam jets go to the atmosphere, it will come back down, right? So it causes intense global rain. So as you can see, God did not create nimbus, great amounts of nimbus clouds or whatever types of clouds that produce super rain. The rain came from underground. So as you can see, the primary source of the rain was not supernatural global clouds. Okay, I hope I'm clear with that. But it's the result of steam jets coming from inside the earth, like I said. And because the primary mechanism for the flood, like I said, was the bursting out of the materials from inside the earth, it means that rain was not the primary cause of how the earth got flooded, but the cause was catastrophic plate tectonics, or CPT. So okay, what's next? So as materials from inside the earth was coming out, it pushes, okay, and replaces the pre-flood ocean crust, okay, replacing it with new materials coming from inside the earth. So today, our ocean crust was made during the flood because the pre-flood ocean crust was replaced, okay. There are technical details here, but I don't think I have the time to explain. So as the materials from inside the earth pushes, actually, like I said, steam jets, right, going all the way to the atmosphere. There are also, other than the steam jets, the massive stress that's happening to worldwide geology, caused by the cracks and the things coming out of it. Okay, not only did materials went upwards to the atmosphere, but it went horizontally also. Okay, so upwards is steam jets causing global intense rain, like I said, and then the other movement of materials from inside the earth is horizontal. So if it's horizontal, it will push the pre-flood ocean crust, and it will replace it with the new ocean crust that we observe today. Okay, so okay, this is really, there are several angles here. It's really complicated. As it pushes and replaces the pre-flood ocean crust, the first waves of mini tsunamis, which carries sediments, were generated by this activity. And since it started in the oceans, shallow marine creatures will be buried first, obviously. That's why we find marine creatures at the bottom layer of the geologic column. It is not because it is not because of evolution. It's because they were buried first during the flood. And like I said, the flood started in the ocean. So there is like the Bible said, it started in the ocean. So if it started in the oceans, then those shallow marine creatures will be buried first, and they are found at the bottom layer of the geologic column. And they cannot be interpreted as from simple to complex in the geologic column, because the Cambrian rocks, for example, the fossils contained on the Cambrian rocks are already complex. So what complex to, well, what's simple to complex? C. Now, next. Okay, so shallow marine creatures buried first. Then larger sea creatures. Okay, we're still at the seas right now, at the ocean. Larger sea creatures, okay, still sea creatures, larger ones, will be buried next because they're heavier and harder to move. Okay, so that's also what we see in the geologic column. As you can see, there is a perfect explanation. Only Catastrophic can explain it very well. So it is not that those simple shallow marine creatures evolved into larger sea creatures, but it's because those larger creatures were heavier and harder to move. That's why they were buried next after the shallow marine creatures. It makes perfect sense. Okay? So shallow marine creatures first, then larger sea creatures next. As you can see, the flood can explain the order of the fossils in the geologic column. But that's just the bottom layers. Okay? And don't forget, the entire geologic column contains marine creatures from top to bottom. So what's simple to complex? Evolution of life. When everything is when there are a lot of marine creatures on every rock layer in the world. Of course, I know the evolutionary explanation of this, but I will get to that next time. And it's easy to refute. They won't even dare to debate about this. Is my audio doing well?
Yeah, your audio is great, actually.
Yeah.
So
I heard some echo. Okay, now let's. Am I going too detailed on this?
no, I think you're. I think you're doing good right now. Like, just before you continue, just to kind of put it into, or just to reiterate a couple things for the audience. So based on this model of CPT, the scope and scale of the energy produced by the flood would be astounding. And the fountains of the great deep, as you're talking about, Jeremy, they break open, and Earth, it's fractured like an eggshell, right? And in the continents, as you said, they're moving vertically and horizontally. And these tsunamis drive the floodwaters onto the continents. You got unending rain and geologic catastrophes. So if these continents, this continental sprint versus, the evolutionist continental drift, it's moving at rapid paces through the floodwaters. So the audience needs to imagine just complete geological havoc, right?
Yes. And those atheist evolutionists love to misrepresent our data. They said, how could a flood well, never mind that. We'll get to that next time. This is only part one, right? So now let's go back to the pushing and replacing of the pre-flood ocean crust, because I recall that's where I left off a few minutes ago. Now let's go back to the pushing and replacing of the pre-flood ocean crust. Okay, the new materials from inside the Earth, as it pushes and replaces the pre-flood ocean crust. The pre-flood, remember, it's a horizontal movement also. The pre-flood ocean crust will first be pushed towards the edges of the one supercontinent Pangaea. So remember those displaced materials coming from inside the Earth, going horizontally. They're pushing the pre-flood ocean crust, and when you push the pre-flood ocean crust and replacing it with old Earth, old with a new crust from inside the Earth, or material from inside the Earth, the pre-flood ocean crust will, as it's being pushed, will be pushed towards the supercontinent Pangaea. Okay, so the pre-flood crust makes contact with the supercontinent Pangaea. They both collide. Okay, because the pre-flood ocean crust is being catastrophically pushed by new material coming from inside the Earth. And when they both collide, the pre-flood ocean crust will subduct against the one supercontinent Pangaea. Okay, it will subduct when they make contact, because the geology of this is because the old ocean crust was denser. Okay, the old ocean crust was denser than the warmer mantle beneath or underneath it. So when old ocean crust, so as you can see, it's poised to sink. It's poised to sink after it makes contact with the supercontinent. Where will it go when it makes contact with the supercontinent? It went downwards. It can't go upwards. It went downwards, and because the warmer mantle underneath allows it to go down, because the ocean crust was denser than the warmer mantle underneath. So it started sinking, and it touches so it started sinking. And while it's sinking, it is still in contact with the supercontinent. There are still friction between them. I don't know if English is the correct friction. Okay, while it's touching the edges of the supercontinent while sinking, and by the way, there is even evidence for this in, if I'm not mistaken, Monterey Canyon, of this scraping zone. This is a supercontinent. This is the pre-flood ocean crust. The scraping zone right here, the scraping zone, Monterey Canyon, is one evidence. It's in California, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, we'll go in detail to that next time. So while it's touching the edges of the supercontinent while sinking, it drags the continents downwards also. Okay, the massive plate tectonics that is pushing and driving the pre-flood ocean crust to subduct, as it, like I said, it is still in contact with the super Pangaea, with the supercontinent. It gets dragged downwards. As it subducts, it also drags the continents, this one supercontinent, downward with it. Okay, this result in the continents going down and being gradually flooded. So as you can see, we now have a mechanism to flood the entire Earth when the supercontinent started to get dragged downwards by the pre-flood ocean crust. Okay, and if you ask an evolutionist how this could happen under the standard slow-paced plate tectonics, they have a hard time answering that. Okay, because of of how the Earth, the crust mantle is designed. Okay, so the continent, so the pre-flood ocean crust is being subducted, dragging downwards the continents with it. Okay, and slowly being flooded. Okay, now this is when. Okay, now this is when land creatures start to be buried as the continents was dragged downwards, and waters, tsunamis, really inundating. I'm not sure inundating is the right word. Going to the continents, tsunami carrying sediments from tectonic activity that I mentioned, and the supercontinent being dragged down allowed land creatures to be buried next after sea creatures. And if you read the Bible correctly, or if you read the Bible well, you will see that it says that humans and many land animals lived on higher ground. Okay, so if the continents are dragged downwards slowly and gradually, those living on higher ground will be buried last. Correct? There is a Bible verse that says that these humans and some land animals live on an area with 4 rivers. It's in the Bible. And when you live on an area with 4 rivers, you know you live on higher ground. Correct? So, and I know evolutionists will open up dinosaurs. So it's illogical for humans and dinosaurs to live at the exact same place because dinosaurs are so large and would create obvious conflict. So it's so logically speaking, dinosaurs and humans lived far apart from each other. Okay, so as the flood waters rose, dinosaurs will be buried first because dinosaurs lived on lower ground compared to humans. They could not have lived with humans because they are so large and would create conflict. And like the Bible said, humans and many other animals lived on a hill because that hill has 4 rivers. So they live on higher ground. So dinosaurs will be buried first before humans because they're on lower ground. Correct? Right? That's why we don't find humans and dinosaur fossils together. It is completely a no-shocker. So evolutionists cannot use this argument against creationists. So in most cases, the animals were buried according to where they lived. Okay? In most cases in the geologic column, the animals were buried according to where they lived, not when they lived in evolutionary history. So it's by ecosystems in most cases where they were buried. Okay, so there is no more density sorting here. It is much simpler explanation. This one is. So evolutionists cannot accuse creationists. Actually, see the catastrophic plate tectonics. This model does not use density at all. Okay, we use the ecosystem thing over here, buried by ecosystem. So as we see.
I just want to. So would you confidently say, like, everything you're saying is perfect, but would you say that it's a much stronger rebuttal to, say, the objections from militant atheists like Aron Ra? You know, burial by ecosystems. I know it's a little bit more technical than just, you know, saying that, but in general, that's a much stronger rebuttal to his objection, right, Jeremy?
It's irrefutable because that's what we find in the geologic column. Okay. Though the geologic column, we can also interpret them by ecosystem. Like I said, shallow marine craters at the bottom, that's one ecosystem, and those larger sea creatures are another ecosystem that live in deeper waters. That's why they're buried next because they're heavier. Like I said before, okay. So as we see these sea creatures and land creatures getting buried by tsunami-carrying sediments, those sediments created the rock layers we observe today. So the ones that buried the animals and sea creatures, those carry sediments, and those sediments created the rock layers we see today. Okay, massive catastrophic plate tectonics equals to massive sedimental deposits also. And to prove that those rock layers were deposited one after the other quickly during the flood, we find no evidence or no significant evidence of erosion in between the contact points, in between the borders of the rock layers worldwide. The 6 mega sequence of rock layers worldwide don't show real evidence of erosion in between them. There are some, but they are localized erosion. They don't show millions of years of erosion that you would expect if those rock layers were buried one after another during a span of millions of years. Those erosional evidence in between the rock layers are to be expected if the layers were laid down millions of years from one another. Like when one layer is deposited, then another millions of years of environments will happen on top of that layer. Okay, then another layer would be deposited, and in between them there should be evidence of that environmental erosional signatures, but it's severely lacking. So where are the millions of years in these layers? You can clearly see the lack of these layers when you go to the Grand Canyon. When you look at Grand Canyon rocks, it is just like they were deposited on these rock layers were just deposited one after the other without evidence of millions of years of erosion in between those rock layers. There's a huge gap. So those rock layers must have been deposited quickly. Now, going back to the subducting pre-flood ocean crust, if you guys are, I hope you guys are really following. It is complex, but it is not really that hard to understand if you analyze it. Okay, so let's go back to the subducting pre-flood ocean crust. This subduction went all the way to the mantle core area. Okay, like I said before, continents being dragged downwards, while the pre-flood crust is also subducting. Okay, when it subducts these pre-flood ocean crust, when it subducts towards the mantle, it naturally would displace. It would displace more materials from inside the earth. So materials inside the earth will be displaced. So where are they gonna go? Where are these materials gonna go? That's a good question. Okay. And this is okay. So the pre-flood ocean crust displaces materials from inside the earth. So those materials inside the earth that are being displaced will have to go somewhere. And you know where they went? They went to the continent, the one supercontinent. It's still one supercontinent at this point. When they went to that one supercontinent, okay, it's being displaced and being pushed towards this one supercontinent. What it does is it cracks up. These displaced materials go all the way back on top towards the supercontinent and ruptures it. It ruptures it. Okay, new materials coming up ruptures the original supercontinent. Okay, because it needs to. It's being forced upwards. Okay, it ruptures it and it breaks it apart. It breaks the one supercontinent apart, which led to the formation of the 7 continents we see today. As you can see, nothing is unexplainable. Everything is explainable if you believe in the global flood. Now, we even have testable predictions of this. Okay, so you get that point. You guys now get why why we have many continents, right? So it's a very easy. It's really easy if you really analyze it very well. It's not hard. Okay, so pre-flood ocean crust displacing materials from inside the earth, and those displacement went to the supercontinent and cracking the supercontinent, those displaced materials, because they need to go somewhere and they're being pushed strongly by catastrophic plate tectonics. That's why it ruptures the one supercontinent, breaking it apart meters per second, which led to the formations of the 7 continents we see today. We even have testable predictions of this. What I mean is the subduction, not the continents. The continents, we'll get to that next time. The base, I'll just explain the basics. So we now go to the testable predictions. This pre-flood ocean crust, like I said, is subducting, right? Okay. So if it subducts downwards, we would expect it to still be there today. If this subduction only happened recently, we would expect it to still be there. It will have it will not have enough time to be assimilated. It should still be cold. Okay, insufficient time to be warmed up if it only happened 4,000 years ago during the flood. Okay, and in 1994, catastrophic plate tectonics predicted the pre-flood ocean floor to be found inside the earth. 1994, as cold slabs, like I said, there are cold slabs that have not yet time to completely cool off. And in 1997, seismic data revealed these cold slabs of the pre-flood ocean floor. Catastrophic plate tectonics is true. Yeah, like I said, 1997, we found seismic images, data revealed these cold slabs of pre-flood ocean floor. It's even in evolutionary literature.
So
they have a hard time explaining it. So it means catastrophic plate tectonics. It's true. The strength and speed of catastrophic plate tectonics generated meters per second movement of the continents, spreading them apart, like I said, faster during the flood as time goes by. Meters per second is the estimate. Okay, and then it will slow down to its current. It will slow down. Okay, something so fast will eventually slow down. It will slow down to its current snail paced or very slow paced plate tectonics. So it slowed down. So as you can see, the inches per second movement of the continents today are remnants of the catastrophic plate tectonics that happened during the flood. So as you can see, we are still seeing evidence of catastrophic plate tectonics today, and we can even make predictions on that. And there are more. And let's see, mountains. Okay, mountain ranges like the Himalayas. The Himalayas was also created during the flood because high mountains didn't exist before the flood. So evolutionists cannot say, oh, how can you cover Mount Everest? Well, Mount Everest did not exist before the flood. Only hills existed before the flood. Okay, I'll go in detail on this next time. And there's this popular Indian plate, as we know. You see the Indian plate crashing mightily or strongly towards the Eurasian plate, causing the Himalayas to rise very high. Only a catastrophic plate tectonics can create the Himalayas because slow and gradual plate tectonics could not create it because it lacks the strength to do it. Okay, only a massive collision would buckle those plates into creating the huge mountains of the Himalayas. And if you look at the Himalayas from space, it looks like it's bruised. It looks like it's bruised. And only a huge catastrophe can bruise it. It looks like the Indian plate collided catastrophically with Eurasia, creating the bruise. So the flood's catastrophic plate tectonics did it. You need enough strength, okay, and momentum to create the Himalayas, okay? And since the Himalayas is still moving today, we are seeing the remnants of this massive catastrophic plate tectonics that happened during the flood. Also, one more thing, lastly, I think I've taken too much time already if I'm not mistaken. Also, all this geologic activity during the flood caused most of the earth rocks to look old. It accelerated decay rates through heat and pressure during catastrophic plate tectonics. That's why many rock dating show millions of years. Heat and pressure during the flood, okay? Heat and pressure happening to all the rocks worldwide due to catastrophic plate tectonics will accelerate decay rates, okay? Creationists even have testable predictions of these when we studied these rocks and exposed them to intense heat and pressure, and it did indeed accelerated decay rates. So, okay, so as you can see, if you trust in God's word, the evidence, and if you open your mind, not be biased like evolutionists, the evidence is plain and clear for all to see. So I think that's enough standing for truth. What do you think?
I think that's really good, and I think one point that deserves to be reiterated. I mean, you explained it and expounded upon it so so perfectly, but the fact is, any hypotheses, any model, a lot of the times is based on the strength of its testable predictions. So as you were talking about earlier with the pre-flood ocean crust, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's being dragged down into the mantle.
It's called runaway subduction.
Right. Okay. So it's called the subduction process, but the cold ocean crust should still be cold, since this occurred only thousands of years ago, even though it has descended into the deep hot mantle. And like you said earlier, seismic data from NASA has actually revealed enormous slabs of cool rock underneath North America. So down.
Standing for truth.
Yep.
It's at the mantle core boundary. It's everywhere. It's not only in North America. It's everywhere. It's at the mantle core boundary specifically.
So down in the core itself, then, as you're talking about here, which should be warm, it's confirmation of a flood geology. Just like you said, I mean, there's a testable prediction based on this model, which only goes to show, like you said, if we trust in God's word and look at the empirical data, they're fully consistent. And then also the distribution of the fossils based on burial of ecosystems, habitats, for example. That alone, well, for one, densities, like you said, aren't even needed. And someone like Aron Ra's arguments in regards to, yeah, go ahead.
Just a quick thing. I'm already going so much into detail. Anyway, okay, the flood carrying sediments actually transferred the tidal wave generating sediments. Like I said, it was buried by ecosystem, right? And those the power of the catastrophic plate tectonics would allow those sediments, those tsunamis, to migrate those ecosystems, transferring their original location to another location. Did you understand that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So,
yeah, there's more. There's a lot more. I can really go in deep detail on all of these. So
did you want to maybe go in detail on one more, if you have time, if you don't mind?
I don't know. I interrupted you, right? So
no. My whole goal with that, I just wanted to reiterate the point about the cool slabs, because it's a testable prediction based on the model, and evolutionists are always asking about testable predictions, and you know what, there you go, the gold standard of science. So I don't mind you going into I think it's important, given the strength of this model and given the fact that atheists like Aron Ra are now spending a lot of their time attacking flood geology, specifically, I think, the hydroplate theory. So I don't mind you going into detail.
Okay. So which one? The slabs?
Which one do you feel is deserving of a more detailed and thorough explanation?
Actually, all my explanations were basic. So you want the slabs?
You know what? Sure, we'll go with the slabs, since that's what we're on, Jeremy. Thank you.
Let's look at it from another angle here. Those slabs, like I said, went all the way to the Earth's mantle and core boundary, correct? And when you disrupt, so in a way, those cold slabs, so they made contact with the core. And when you make contact with the core, it will cause destabilization of the Earth's tilt. Okay, it will make the Earth rotate like rotate. Not sure if it's rotate. It will make the Earth move wrongfully. Move wrongfully. I forgot the exact English word. Sorry, not good in English. Okay, so my point is this: the cold slabs, when they make contact with the core of the Earth, mantle core boundary, it destabilizes the Earth, destabilizes the rotation of the rotation of the Earth, like flip. I don't know exactly how to explain it in English. Sorry. Okay, but anyway, this disruption towards the core would disrupt the Earth's tilt and the Earth's rotation. Okay, it's okay, and when you disrupt Earth's rotation, since catastrophic plate tectonics is happening at the same time, when you disrupt the tilt of the Earth and its rotation, globs. Okay, I think this is the correct English word. Globs, globs, globs of water would be generated worldwide. Okay, worldwide. But these globs of water will not happen at the same time. They will happen based on the position of the Earth when it's being when it's being destabilized. It's tilt. Okay, it will happen one at a time. Okay, and catastrophic plate tectonics also predicts that don't forget we have six mega sequences of six super mega sequence of rock layers worldwide, right? Okay, the primary rock layers are six in the world, and the catastrophic plate tectonics before the modeling began predicted that that there should be six globs of water currents that would have been generated by the destabilization of the Earth's tilt and rotation, because like I said, the cold slabs penetrated the core and it causes destabilization, okay, for the Earth's tilt, and in a way that would create globs, huge globs of water. Before the modeling by Dr. John Baumgartner, who is the primary inventor of the CPT, he predicted that there should be six globs of water, which would deposit the six mega sequence of rock layers worldwide. We need six because there are six primary rock layers worldwide. And guess what his modeling? Guess what his his computer modeling revealed? Six globs of water would have been generated by this contact between the pre-flood ocean crust and the core. So, and these six, all each happening one after the other, not at the same time. One glob forming and then depositing the first layer, then another glob forming, depositing the other layer, and so on up to the six mega sequence of rock layers worldwide. So that is another thing about the slabs, of how it indirectly helps in creating or generating the rock layers we see in the world today. And there are more. Is that enough? Standing for truth?
Yeah, no, you know what? I find that amazing. I find that very thorough. This being episode 1, guys, I hope everyone enjoyed. I think people are really going to profit from this series. That, you know, Team Young Earth Creation here is presenting, and you know, this is part 1. So this is just a basic overview of, you know, the model catastrophic plate tectonics. So the more you guys tune in, the more we're going to delve deep. We're going to delve deep into other models, for example, you know, gravitational time dilation in regards to distant starlight. On a genetic level, we'll certainly talk a lot about genetic entropy, created heterozygosity hypothesis. So we've got a lot to look forward to, guys. This was episode 1. I think it was good. Once again, Ra Matt was on earlier. He had to leave a little while ago, but I want to thank him again for coming on. I want to thank Landon for coming on, and Jeremy for coming on. Did you guys have any last things to say?
Standing for truth. May I speak to you off the air later?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Off the air. Off air.
Absolutely. Yeah. We can do it. We can do it right away.
Just quick.
And did you have any last? I know there's a couple things we're going to touch on, Landon, that I think we'll do first thing for our next stream.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. I think we got a lot covered, and I just want to say I'm looking forward to the next episode. So
awesome.
Good job, Landon.
Oh,
Yeah,
thanks.
you brought up some really good stuff, Landon, and a lot of it near the beginning. So I'm excited for people to tune in the next few days, and hopefully digest everything that was said. And yeah, like you said, we touched on a variety of topics, and I think flood geology is something that we've certainly touched on, but we haven't gone into great detail in the past. So this being a really, really good overview for people, stay tuned, because we're really, really gonna get deep into it and hammer it out. So everybody have a good night. Standing for Truth is out. Thanks for dropping by.
Bye.